Hey, you. Welcome back to the Human Experience. I'm your host, Ciera Cruse, and this is the place where we talk about all things human, all things life, and everything in between. We are redefining what it means to be human for ourselves rather than listening to what everyone else has to say about it. All right, you guys. So we have a really exciting podcast today because we have a special guest. We have Parker, who is a spiritual seeker, artist, and entrepreneur living in Hawaii, who I found and connected with on TikTok. And I'm super excited to talk with him today. I came across one of his videos that we will definitely be getting into because it was so interesting and definitely left me questioning things, which I love. So, hi, Parker. Thank you for being here.
Hi, yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So I wanted to start off hearing about your spiritual journey, kind of what got you started with spirituality and kind of what it means to you and your spiritual journey.
Sure, yeah. I think looking back, I've always kind of had spiritual ideas and thoughts kind of brewing around. I think it's natural that a lot of people start to ask the bigger questions of life. I think it's just like inherent to being a human, being curious about, the unknown. What's the purpose of life? Who am I? Some of those bigger questions. Basically, like what's really going on here,
Totally.
And I feel like to me, that was just kind of always there in the background. I was brought up Christian by my parents. So we were going to church every Sunday, and all the teachings of Jesus were like the initial sort of spiritual exposure that I got.
Gotcha.
I, at a very young age, when we all get like angsty teenager phase, like even a few years before that, I remember being like 9 or 10 and already started questioning the institutional aspect of
Oh,
religion.
yeah.
And then like just fast forward to high school, I started doing like world religion studies. I studied like Buddhism a little bit more intently. And so like it just kind of naturally came on early. And then, through my education process, I sort of started branching out into all the different avenues and world religions. That's kind of like the beginning setup for where I'm coming from.
Gotcha. And that's super interesting because the same thing was kind of for me. I always felt like it was just the best way I've heard it described is it's like something's like it's a splinter in your mind. You don't know exactly what it is, but something's telling you something is off. And I always kind of
Mm.
felt like that growing up. Like I couldn't really put my finger on what it was, but I just felt
Yeah.
like we weren't living life correctly. I always felt like
Mm.
we were making life harder on ourselves than we needed to. And I just didn't understand why
Mm.
we did certain things the way that we did them. But I just kind of like growing up, I just started doing what everyone else was doing, just being normal or whatever. But I was
Right.
definitely the same way. And so, since you came from a spiritual background, or I'm sorry, Christianity, which is spiritual background too, do you still
Yeah.
identify with Christianity, or have you kind of split off into your own thing, spiritual wise?
I would say the latter. Yeah. I kind of took what I could from Christianity, and then kind of I feel like I grew from there. Like I said, some of like like the moral implications, like some of the common themes with all world religions are like do the right thing, be a good person, and I could see all of that in those parables and in those stories. And then there was like one shift actually. Like I was going to this one church with my mom. My mom was like kind of the influence there, and they switched pastors. And for like my whole youth, it was this like really lovely woman who was like giving the sermon every Sunday. And she had this like very motherly quality, and she had great stories, and everyone loved her a lot. And it was actually a great experience. And then they switched to this guy that was just a little bit more rigid, and I didn't really vibe with him. And I just like, again, was getting into that angsty phase. And I just kind of like took what I could from it. And even though they kept trying to shove it down my throat a little bit, I kept kind of pushing back and moving away. I was like, I basically, I was like, I got to figure it out. Like, I don't need any more of that. So I stopped kind of associating myself with Christianity at a pretty young age. And yeah, I try not to label it, to be honest.
Yeah.
I don't really go with like, I'm this or that. I think we're all naturally spiritual by nature. I think it's just like what we're made of, and is that driving force for like asking these types of questions that we were talking about, like the splinter in the mind.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've just kind of like now I've got like a hodgepodge of like my own education, and like I'm pulling from all the different places, and that's where I start to like make thematic connections between different sources, and kind of use what's, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear, and I tend to find the stuff that's going to help me in whatever phase of life that I'm in, and integrate it into my thoughts, words, and actions as much as I can. So yeah, I think now I would just sort of generally call it like spirituality in general, but I have influences from all of the sources.
Yeah, I love that, because I'm actually the same way. I am the same way.
Good.
I was really, I feel like blessed, not that if you were raised with any kind of religion or spirituality that you weren't as well, but my mom never pushed anything on me. She always just told me, when you're older, do your own research, feel it out for yourself, come to your own conclusions.
Sure.
And I feel like that really gave me the space to really not have any like preconceived notions or hindrances as to what to believe in, what's right and what's wrong. I truly got to decide for myself. And that's what I love about spirituality so much, is that you can make it your own. It's personal to you. And I think that's exactly how it should be. I think, like
Totally.
you said, there's like many things within different religions, Christianity included, that like are just about like good morals and things like that, that are just kind of like universal. Yes, we should all be doing this kind of thing. But yeah, that's what I love so much about spirituality, is that you can make it personal to you, rather than religion kind of more so telling you what you need to be doing, how you need to be believing, etc.
Yeah, and when you kind of open the boundaries there, rather than just having one sect that you're only listening to, for me, when I opened those boundaries, I opened up to a lot more knowledge, because you're not like in a fine window. You're able to not only have like other religious inputs, but also authors that are spiritual by nature, but wouldn't really fall into one sect or another anyway. And so a lot of the authors that I've read, you never would find in a parable or in a teacher or anything like that. So you kind of, when you broaden that perspective, you end up getting, it's like world religions plus the rest of the world, and the input there. And I think, a lot of that kind of stuff for me, because like, I don't know if it's like how I am or how a lot of people are, but like, I take everything with a grain of salt, and I like tend to doubt a heavy amount, which is like initially what kind of like turned me off towards that institutional upbringing, was because there's a heavy amount of doubt that goes along with this process. And so for me, finding authors that had a lot of that as well, and had worked through it in a very logical left brain way. A lot of these guys are scientists, etc. Finding books like that laid out some of the like the logistical ways of like how reality works, how consciousness works. To me, that helped me get over my like levels of logical doubt on some stuff, because it took it from woo woo into like, oh, okay, I can see under the hood, and that makes perfect sense,
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really amazing way to explain it, because one of the ways I kind of like to think of it now that I have more knowledge and understanding on like just spirituality and kind of the base of it, the energy of it all, the interconnectedness, the oneness of everything. Like, I think it makes sense to me that like throughout different religions, that like they all are telling a similar truth, just in a different way, in a different variation. Just like we speak different languages in different countries, like what is going to appeal to that certain group of people is based off of their sense of normality. And so I just think like every religion has that piece of truth in it, and it's all coming back to that oneness, universal inner spirituality. And like that's one of the things that kind of blew my mind too at first, like the oneness of everything within spirituality. That is something that really blew my mind and woke me up. I just started to like see it for myself. Like I remember one of the first meditations I ever had, I went outside and I was just like looking at this tree, and the tree branches, I was like, those kind of look like the veins in my arms though. And I just had this moment that I was like, hold on, like everything really is connected with each other. And it just, from there, I went down a rabbit hole and I've never returned, and I would not like to ever return. But so did you have a moment like that where you kind of woke up to, there's more to this, I am more, I'm connected to everything?
I've had many, to be honest. I've had like that same one of like the branches of the veins and the branches of the trees. I had that as well. I think, I personally went down a road of psychedelic experimentation as well, and
Ooh,
testing out, like, expanding my consciousness using psilocybin and LSD and things like that. So, I kind of went towards like the psychonaut arena that like Ram Dass and all those guys were going down. I experimented with a lot of that, and that kind of stuff it's basically like cheat codes. Like, you basically get shown, like, a lot of ways that they put it is like, it's like windows into coming attractions. It's basically like you're launching yourself into a spiritual evolution that's like a million years down the road
right.
for 5 hours or whatever. So those experiences for me were a big like aha moments. And that's a lot of times I would have those types of intense experiences, then come back to sobriety and everything is back to normal. And the struggle would be making sense of a lot of that, because a lot of those experiences are just too much information. It's just an overload.
Right.
You just can't really absorb everything. And then integrating some of the truths that are self-evident in those experiences of like, okay, this oneness is quite obvious. So you can, experience it quite physically and mentally, and visually. And then, how do I make that part of my day to day, even when I'm just back to normal here?
Right.
So yeah, personally, I kind of went down that road to shot put myself forward a little
Yeah.
bit.
Yeah.
But the analogy I like to say along with that is like, even if you get launched, let's say, a mile down the spiritual path, right? Now you're a mile forward than you were this morning. When you're there, you have these experiences in general. Like for me personally, I had a lot more like heart opening experiences, a lot more unconditional love, things like this. And like the oneness that you were talking about. And to me, that's kind of like putting like a flag in the sand, like that mile out. And then that experience fades and you go back to where you were. You're maybe one or
Right.
two steps forward. And depending on your experience, maybe one or two steps backwards. But either way, you go back to where you were, but you can still see the flag out there. And so that's kind of how I've looked at it, is like, okay, I have these memories and these experiences to draw upon for a sense of direction. So that's kind of like what kind of cracked my shell. And I was integrating it when I was coming back by using more education and more reading and more like finding out. Like I remember coming back like from a weekend experience and drawing on I'm an artist, so I drew on a like a napkin at a cafe, and I asked my friends, I'm like, have you seen this? And it was the flower of life, and it was just like one of the most common, symbols. It's like throughout ancient times, it's like everywhere. And I'm like, do you guys know what this is? And they kind of looked at me sideways, like, are you serious? Like that's the flower of life or the seed of life. And I was like, oh yeah, sure. And like went, Googled it, read all the books. Like, so I kind of like put in a cheat code, then went back and did all
Wow.
the research to kind of follow up with everything. Yeah.
Wow, that's like a wow. That's I love hearing about your experience because it's similar and different to mine. And it's just so interesting to see how different people kind of come to their understandings or their viewpoints on things.
Go
But
about it. Yeah.
yeah. And so psilocybin is something that I have been wanting to try and get into. I am just terrified to. I'm one of those people, I'm very, very sensitive to substances, very. And so I'm just
Yeah.
kind of afraid how I will react to it. But that's definitely something I'm kind of developing more. Well, I'm getting more comfortable with the idea of it. That because
Warming
I,
up. Yeah.
yeah, I'm comfortable with spirituality. I love spirituality. It's my jam. I love to talk about this kind of thing. But
Yeah.
to really experience it firsthand is something that takes me some time in that kind of way. Because I've had some trips, if you will, with like cannabis, but nothing too crazy. But what I have experienced was kind of even a little bit too much for me, even though it was not really a lot. But it was just like I saw some symbols and colors and whatnot, and I just immediately freaked out. And so for
Yeah,
me,
if you're getting that from cannabis, then you definitely are very sensitive. Yeah.
oh, it's so bad, and it's like not a lot of cannabis whatsoever.
It's so good.
Yeah, very true. So I'm trying to get a little more comfortable with dabbling in that kind of arena. It's just very intense for me. Yeah. So I'm happy that you kind of have an experience with that. That's something I would love to talk with you about more.
I had to warm way, like I was in your shoes too. Like it takes a lot of courage, but believe me, it's like I'm nervous every time, no matter what.
Yeah.
And you got to start small. Like,
Right.
I'm no doctor. This is not like medical advice or anything like
Right.
that. I would just like preface with that, but like always start small. I mean, my experiences were always like, there was a bunch of baby steps walking forward until I felt comfortable enough to take a couple of broad leaps.
Right.
And so that would be my advice. And that's, you can start as small as possible and
I probably would have to
get no effect of kind, and then move from there. That's how science does it. And so that would be my advice if you're trying to warm up to it. Another thing that is like quite obvious, like if you read any of the right now, obviously there's a lot of like research and stuff going on because psilocybin is becoming more widely accepted in psychotherapy and stuff like that, as well as MDMA. And so there's a lot of studies that are going on with these substances at the moment. There's a lot of literature that's out there. So I can, point you to some of the books, but basically set and setting is a major thing. Like you basically want to be in control of the setting that you're in. You want that to be very cozy and very like inviting, very like warm and fuzzy, and positive vibes is the key,
I'll need
so
my
like
mom
good
around.
Music and things that, like, I would say like a guide is another big element there. Having somebody who's been there before, who can like be grounded and like not just, that can like hold your hand a little bit, is another helpful thing.
That's genuinely something I need whenever I go into that arena. Cause it's just, I am sensitive and I have anxiety. Like it would just send me into a tailspin. I don't know how to recover from. So that's really great advice.
I would say start with, before you even warm up to like psychedelic usage or anything like that, I would like increase your meditation game times 10, because pranayama or like breath work and meditation create similar results, and you can stop and the whole thing goes away in 30 seconds, right? So it's just a little bit more controlled rather than like you're kind of, going off of a cliff with a substance that you can't really turn back from. Whereas like, I would say if you really want to start super minor slow, for anyone who's listening, I would say meditation and breath work would be a substance-free way of warming up.
Yeah, definitely. I've had a really awesome experience with meditation. One of like, I've been doing it now for about 2 years, but I get scared when I get too far. When I get to those arenas where I'm starting to see things or experience different things I'm not used to, I freak out a little bit. But I had a really great meditation once where I was doing like really, the word I wanted to use is like escaping me, but like, I guess intense for lack of a better word, but I was just having like, what is that word? It's like on the tip of my tongue. I'm sorry.
Like overwhelming.
It was like just okay, I'll just use intense for lack of a better word, but I was just doing some intense breathing, intense breath work, and my entire body started vibrating. And that was one of the first times where I really understood for myself firsthand that like you can genuinely get high off your own supply, for lack of a better term, but just like genuinely, like I was like, my body is doing this. And that's like, that kind of segued me into learning that we also have DMT within our body and different kind of psychedelic, psychoactive like ingredients within our own bodies. Like that.
Yeah, it's called endogenous. It's like when you can naturally create it yourself. Yeah.
That's unreal to me. Like something that, have you ever heard of Dr. Joe Dispenza?
Yeah.
Have you? I'm obsessed with him. Sorry, I'm probably just yelling in your ear. But I'm obsessed with him. I think he is brilliant and awesome. And he, like, I was already into spirituality before I came across him, but he married spirituality and science for me in a way that I thought was just brilliant, and in a way I think the world really needs. And that's one of the many reasons I think that he's brilliant. But I read something of his that I was gonna tell you. I'm sorry, I lose my train of thought sometimes.
That's cool. I mean, I think a lot of what's interesting about like that train of thought or that tangent is that like a lot of what I've looked at is how science is like just a few steps behind spirituality. Like 100%. Spirituality takes a lot on faith and just kind of, sure, like I said, we have healthy doubt, but we're more willing to kind of be like, okay, but this has got to be true over here, just the way we're looking at it. And then like science is kind of like, sure, but we need to know for sure.
Right.
And that's why I was saying like some of the texts that you can find, like Ishtak Bentov's work and things of that nature, where they're breaking down the science that walks you up towards how everything works, as far as physics and quantum physics eventually.
Yeah.
And then like the leap from there into consciousness, and like the mechanics of consciousness are very exciting, because, you know, we've all heard of like the placebo effect. We've all heard of like the observer effect. And when you like spin that science stuff into spirituality, it's already right there. Like in spirituality, they're already like, yeah, you are obviously like, once you witness something, you're making it manifest. That's how that works. And like, they've been talking about it for thousands of years. And then just lockstep behind them is science trying to prove that with, you know, the methods of science.
Right. Right.
Yeah, that's, again, it's kind of back to like that, using the left brain, right brain stuff to kind of like line it all up. And really, because at the end of the day, it really comes down to like core belief. Like you can think something is very true, or you can see the logic pattern, but if you still don't like truly believe it in your heart, you're not like really all the way there. And so for me personally, that's been really helpful in kind of creating a core belief system that's a little bit more evolved.
Definitely. And I think that's kind of the perfect segue into talking about your TikTok that I found you from. I think you had it labeled Waking Lucidity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So for those of you that haven't seen it, and I will definitely leave a link down in the description, so definitely go and check it out. Because it, again, like I said before, it was something that made my wheels start turning, and that's my favorite kind of videos to come across. So yeah, why don't you take it away and kind of explain why you made the video, what the video is about?
Sure. I made the video kind of on a whim, to be honest. I don't like pre-plan. I'm not like, I used to produce video like professionally and stuff like that, and I was like very regimented, but I've passed that phase, and I was just kind of winging it and having fun. And, you know, I just enjoy these kinds of conversations and talking about these topics. It's what I'm constantly thinking about anyway. So it's fun for me. And so like, you know, I was making like artistic videos on TikTok. I was making painting process videos, you know, so you could watch me in the content of, you know, this is how I start, this is how I paint, this is how I finish. And I would be voiceovering or talking over and explaining what I was up to, and also describing like some of the ideas that were going into the artwork, because a lot of them are spiritual in nature. I mean, all my artwork, like I'm looking around my house right now, it's like every single one of them.
You're amazing, by the way.
Deep space. Oh, thank you.
You're welcome. Your art's amazing.
It's all very like cosmic stuff, and like it's all of these like ideas that I'm trying to get across, and I was using art as like a medium for that. So
I love that.
I would have this idea, this like spiritual thing that either I had read about or I'd been thinking about, and I would be trying to like use it as like a poetic way of explaining that idea in a visual medium. And for TikTok, I just started being like, well, why don't I just like take the medium part away and just like say the idea and have like oral passage be the medium. And I happen to be like, you know, gifted with the gift of gab, where I can just kind of chat away. And so for me, it's just a little easier, and I don't have to buy any paints, and I can just talk. So that's kind of how, like, that's the setup before that video. So I just decided I'll just start talking to camera. And so for that particular video, what I was describing is essentially based in the ideas of reincarnation, and also like the idea that, you know, you're not a human having a spiritual experience, but that you're your spirit having a human experience. And from that perspective shift, then it starts to feel like, okay, well, if home is on the other side, then this would be like the sort of dreamlike land of the other experience, right? Or like the human experience that we're having.
Right.
And in that train of thought, now that means that this is kind of like a dream. And as you progress in your spiritual evolution, as you expand your consciousness towards enlightenment, like a Buddha or something like this, that would be akin to becoming lucid in this dream world. Okay, so if you've ever been lucid in an actual dream, like when you go to bed at night and you've been lucid, You can like, you know, the laws of physics are at your whim. Again, it goes back to core beliefs. If you believe you can fly, you can fly. That's just how it works when you're lucid dreaming.
Right.
And so if I posited to the audience, you know, if this is that scenario and we're all waking up to lucidity here within this dream and seeing it as dream, wouldn't that then mean that we're all going to be able to have those types of like magical abilities that we liken to, you know, Jesus walking on water or making water into wine, things like that? And I likened it to like, you know, are we going to be able to like fly and like immediately manifest? And like, you know, when I lucid dream, I like to do telekinesis and stuff like that. So it was just kind of like a fun spin on it that I think a lot of people really resonated with, because they've all heard the original idea of the spirit having a human experience thing. And I just kind of drew it out a little further for them to see the longer picture there.
Right. I thought it was brilliant. And I think it makes so much sense, because when you are in it, I've only ever lucid dreamed one time that I can like remember. And I was flying like you described. And it was just crazy. Like I was flying over top and I could just make the scene below me anything I wanted. I would say giraffes in Africa and it would be that. And then elephants in Thailand, it'd be that. And so, but that's the only one I ever had. But it made me realize, like, once you made this video and I kind of started thinking about my own stuff too, I was like, well, because when you go to sleep and you're in a dream and you're not lucid dreaming, that dream feels just as real life does. So how do we even know which one is real, which one isn't? And something else that goes along with that too is the fact that like we are constantly just shifting through different levels of consciousness when we go to sleep, when we're in REM, when we're in a deep sleep, like when we're in waking life, like those are different levels of consciousness we're constantly shifting between. So it's like it's something that like it blows my mind, excites me, makes my brain hurt a little bit, because I want to know the answer. And it's like, can I ever confirm a factual answer? I don't know. I can confirm what I resonate with most, what I think most, but it's just something that's like I always say, if I could have any superpower, it would be to know everything about everything. And I just, that is something that it's like a splinter in my mind all the time. What is the meaning of all of this? What is that? And it's like, I just think that that's a beautiful way to explain it. And I honestly kind of do think we're going in that direction. If I feel like the way that, you know, people like you and I are coming out and talking about things, having similar ideas, even though we never really met each other, like that's happening all over. And TikTok is kind of the hub to express that, which is not something a year ago I would have ever thought was possible. I would never have thought this many people would be talking about spirituality open like this, or just metaphysical ideas, consciousness, whatever. And so I just thought that was so brilliant. And I genuinely I believe it. I think that we are going into that era, into 5D, whatever you want to call it, where we are going to start to realize that we are creating this experience, and that we've been unconsciously creating this experience. And now we can start consciously creating it into what we want it to be, rather than it having been unconsciously kind of indoctrinated into us what human life should be like, what we should be doing here. And so I thought that was amazing.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I do want to clarify like one aspect of it that I saw a lot of the comments hit on that I think is important to relay here at this point, which is it's both a collective experience and also an individual experience simultaneously.
Yes.
So in the same way that not everybody is at the same level of wokeness or conscious evolution, but we are all one. And so we're all in this space sort of buoyed up by the same base level of what are the combined level of consciousness on the planet is. Now, that ebbs and flows because everybody's on their own individual path, right? So some people are going headstrong forwards, some people are going headstrong backwards. So it really changes as the world changes.
Right.
But your personal evolution can go forward or backwards as well. So, you know, even though we use terms like we are going towards 5D or whatever, For me, I tend to think less like that because I just am more concerned with like where I'm at
Right.
and like how I'm like, am I moving in that direction?
Right.
I certainly like lend a hand and try to help people like in this direction. But I'm well aware that there are many people who maybe they're young souls and they are coming in and they're just learning, or maybe they're someone who it's part of their path to go backwards for a while. And so, you know, even if, you know, and I think another part of it too is like, as you said, like the internet is kind of like exploding a lot of these ideas, which is very helpful. As we see in modern day America, it's also exploding a lot of negative ideas too.
Yeah.
So it's like all of this is happening in a very yin yang way. We're in a dimension where there's positive and negative and they're bouncing off of each other. And it's really just how you navigate that ocean and how you're like walking your path and what, you know, what your perception of all of that is and how you want this life to either like walk you in one way or another. So I just wanted to be clear on like, there's certainly a collective experience. I tend to focus a little bit more on what I can manage, which is my own experience and those that I can immediately affect. Because yeah, we're also just like newly exposed to it because we've seen like in the 60s, there was like a big movement there, you know, and eras and eras and eras and eras passed, but there's always like these ebbs and flows because of like what the collective is up to. Certainly there is a lot more voice to it right now, I think, because the culture is supporting it. Like if you think back to the 60s, they were saying, cut your hair, get a job. And now they're saying like, cool hairdo and I love your new startup. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's a little bit more culturally supported that like people are, I don't know, being vegan and starting businesses and like being a little bit more conscious rather than it was like straight up shot down for so long in our parents and grandparents' generations. So it's definitely a different landscape, but I definitely want to like kind of hit on that, that point there.
I'm glad you did actually, because I actually have a YouTube video on my channel where I talked about collective consciousness and I called it singular consciousness because I had seen some videos. I can't remember the guy's name, but there was it was a TikTok I saw, and he was just talking about how he kind of feels like the spiritual awakening, the woke movement is leaving people out, that we are focusing too much on our singular experience and saying like, oh, well, I'm going to ascend and we're leaving these other people behind. And that's not that was the entire reason I made the video, but I just felt like it was a misconception that just because you're focusing on your singular experience doesn't mean you're also not helping and focusing on the collective experience, because we live in both of them simultaneously at the same time. But that singular experience is I like to call it the personal reality boundary, because it's like I live in my own personal reality that is for me, that I am creating myself while simultaneously living in this collective experience with everyone else where we can interact with each other. And so I do think that's a really important point to just touch on, that they're both important. You have to come from a place of being able to identify what's right for you and what's not, regardless of what anybody else is saying or doing, while also understanding that you are a part of what everybody else is saying or doing collectively. So I'm glad that you did bring that up, because I think it can just get misconstrued. Like the whole reason I think, well, for me, I'll speak for myself, like the whole reason I started making content was because I started to come to these understandings that help me understand life better for myself. And I don't ever want to tell anybody how to think or what to think. I just want to share my perspective with you that tends to be different than the normal society perspective, and encourage you to do your own research and come up with your own perspectives of life, not just regurgitated ones from your parents, society's leaders, etc. And so, yeah, that is definitely a very, very important point.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think another like way of thinking about it that kind of helped me, because I got kind of caught up with like, okay, how do I make the world a better place? And like, it's such a big world and it's like this undertaking that's it's like largely impossible, right? But the aha I had around that I'll share is like, even though you're having an individual experience, if you're moving forward in your growth, you're like salt in a soup. You're in the soup with everybody and you're like this one little grain of salt. If your little grain of salt changes a little bit for the better or for the worse, you have thus affected the taste of the soup. So you are changing the world by changing yourself. And it made me kind of like see that thing that we hear all the time in that way. Whereas like, oh, okay, like it's a little bit like it's active in your personal thing. It's a little bit passive in the bigger picture. But even if you then have changed the soup a little bit for the better, right? Like let's say you made it taste a little bit better by being a better person, you're also going to be more inclined to help the common man when you see an opportunity to do that. So in your immediate vicinity, you might, let's say, hold the door or smile at somebody or tell somebody that they look beautiful or just share love more openly. You're going to affect the external world around you in that way naturally. So I think it's certainly like this catch-22 of it's both. You know, you're in your own world, like you said, your little bubble. But as you kind of expand your consciousness, you realize that you're one with everybody else and everything's just reflecting anyway. So you tend to be nicer because it just feels good and seems to be the natural way of going about it. Bodhisattva is the name of somebody who, like I said earlier, like walks along the path and then pauses and turns to help those behind them. And I think that's just like a natural inclination that I have and a lot of people on this path have, which is what we're doing here is, you know, we're putting information out for anybody that's anywhere along the path behind us to be able to pick up these nuggets and not fall in the same ruts or things like that. Yeah.
Right. 100%. And it's like, because once I started to come to an understanding that, I mean, for me, how I felt is that I had been taught wrong my whole life, that everything that I had heard about and experienced was just not what I thought it was. And I always kind of had an inclination to that, but I couldn't put a name to it, a face to it. And when I found spirituality, I could. And then I was like, it kind of clicked for me. I was like, that's why I've always felt so different. That's why I've always looked at things differently. It's because there is a different way to look at it that I was just never aware of. And so for me, like, I think too, I can't remember who said this. I want to say it was Buddha, but just that a human beings, like the thing that they are most inclined to do is like serve, like help others. Like that's what makes us happiest in our brain or something like that. Don't quote me on that. But it's like, that's just a natural human attribute is we want to help other people. We want to be loving and good. And I think that it's just, something that I'm passionate about kind of expressing how I feel is how, or something that I'm passionate about sharing is how our society can kind of mold our minds in different ways to think and behave in certain ways that aren't truly authentic to who we are or to the human experience. Because I think a lot of us are just kind of used to this negative, pessimistic way of existing, because that's just kind of the world that we live in. Bad stuff happens around us all the time. And so like really heinous things. And those things happen because there's a root cause to those things. Those things happen for a reason. Like, for example, like war, for example, is just that was created by somebody. That's not a natural human characteristic. That's not something humans are naturally supposed to do. And maybe they are, but I'm not saying that humans would never fight with each other or anything like that. Just in the sense that like this concept of war, of having to fight each other, of this is mine, this is yours, this is my border, this is where yours is. Those are made up constructs. They're not what the human experience is in its entirety or what it's all about. It's the perspective of it, but it's not all that there is. And I feel like we are taught these certain things as if it's the be all end all to life and this is how life has to be, rather than them letting us know that this is one way to do it. Because there's infinite ways to do it, infinite ways to live, infinite ways to think about things. And we are just so indoctrinated into, in my opinion, into just living a 9-to-5 consumeristic, productive member of society lifestyle, rather than trying to find who we are authentically and what is the meaning of all of this. We're so busy trying to survive in this society that we're not even asking those questions or following through on those questions enough to really discover those things. And we're getting there, I think. But because I think the 9-to-5 productive member society lifestyle is kind of crumbling a little bit, especially with just jobs where you can work on social media, you can do your passion and make money from it in ways we wouldn't have been able to decades ago. And so I think that's a really beautiful thing about the spiritual movement as well, and just about our individuality. That's why I do this podcast. That's why I make content, is to just let people know there's another perspective out there. There's another way we can do things. So if you don't feel like life fits for you or it's not right for you, then try and figure out something different.
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
I think, that, I mean, with like the war thing and like the 9-to-5 thing, the world is your oyster no matter how you want to play the game.
Right.
Those opportunities are going to be there. And like you said, maybe they're not natural, but I would say that they're natural, like pitfalls.
Yeah, they're natural possibilities.
Yeah, it's kind of like there's like the 7 deadly sins. You can spin and all 7 of those or some of those into graceful, like opposites. It depends on, where you're at and like what you need to learn in that lifetime. So, you do see a lot of these trends, but like I think it's really just what we're exposed to, like in your little bubble or my little bubble of what we see on the news or what we're exposed to kind of taints or tints our perception of the world. So somebody who watches the news all day has a lot of fear versus somebody who doesn't, has none of that fear. They just don't see that in the world because it's just not what they're perceiving. So I think a lot of it comes down to perception. And then again, back to like that yin yang thing of like this like school that we call life. You can, be the school bully, you can be the kid in detention, you could be the class clown, you play any character that you want. And I think it all kind of rotates back to like personal evolution. Like if you think about life in terms of like reincarnation and you're on the other, let's for a moment just say you're on the other side and you don't have an ego. I'm not Parker. I am like my soul's nature, just this like totally one with everything part of myself, but I have things that I still need to learn. I still need to like, pay karmic debts that I've incurred while I was down here. So I'm on the other side and I'm, sort of looking at, okay, what era do I want to go in? Who do I want to be like with as far as my family and like the people that I'm with? And like what sort of like big life events could happen that I could learn from, right? Like, so do I want to be that 9-to-5 person or have I already like gotten past that lesson? So I think, I try not to judge people too much on like the position that they're in because I don't know their syllabus for their school. Like, I don't know what their big plan is.
What their soul came here to learn.
Exactly. So even if somebody is like, a really terrible person, it might be that they set themselves up to in a circumstance that would make their ego a terrible person so that they could learn something from that. And so I kind of love on them no matter what. Like, even if they're being that way, it's all good from my angle. Because if you take that broader perspective of life and look at Earth like a school, then we're all just kids that happen to be in the same classroom. And it's like literally kindergarten through college, all in the same room. So it's like, you can't really hate on children for being children and stuff like that. Yeah. So even if people are caught in the 9-to-5, even if people are like engaging in warfare, that just means that they're in first grade. That's fine. That's just not where I'm at. But like, that's okay. It's fine.
Yeah,
it's just
that's a great analogy. And I completely agree. I think that because I'm the type of person, like, I don't really like to judge either, because I really do have an understanding of the fact that like we're all just on our own journey here, all at our own levels and states of consciousness. Everybody's on their own journey. And if you haven't walked in another person's shoes, you can't really accurately judge them anyway. So what's the point of wasting your time and energy on judging something that you don't really know about? And two, I kind of and I kind of look at everybody too as kids in a way, because it's like all of us are just kind of like, because it's just like the weird idea that like once you're 18, you're grown up and you're good. Like, I just don't think that. Like, I think a lot of us are all these kids just in grown up bodies, just kind of thrust into society and daily life. And we're doing what we've been taught to do unconsciously most of the time. We're just kind of surviving, zombieing through life a little bit because we are in survival mode. And so I think that that's one of the big reasons I try not to judge either, is because I just think that everybody is at their own space and in their own journey. And there's so much more that goes into it. Like, within society and the schooling system, like, we literally get indoctrinated into believing certain things, into thinking certain ways, to thinking certain things are normal. And you can be corrupted by that before you even understand what's happening, because our brains in part wire themselves off based off of repeated activities and experiences. So whatever you're repeatedly experiencing or participating in is wiring your brain to think that that's normal, to be familiar and comfortable for you. So when we are being tainted with misinformation, corrupt information at such a young age, and repeatedly done so through our childhood, like that's something that really gets me, because there are so many people that don't even know that that's how the brain works. So they're not even aware that they could be being conditioned and brainwashed to believe in certain things. And now they have certain belief systems ingrained in their head that they are acting out subconsciously on autopilot, that we don't even understand that. Like researching the brain was one of the things I did first. Like whenever I came into spirituality, I wanted to understand how I worked. I was like, I never really, like we take science in school, anatomy, stuff like that, but you don't really learn how you function, operate, like your personality, your authenticity. Like I wanted to know how I functioned. And so when I learned those things about the brain, how they wire itself, how it wires itself, how it stores experiences, and how it kind of creates your self-concept of who you are, I was like, they're molding all of us to believe certain things about ourselves that aren't true, to think certain things about the world and its history that isn't true. And so that's another thing I'm super passionate about, just like expressing to people, like we need to learn more about our own beings and the organs and the bodies inside those beings and how they operate and function, because we have abilities that have just been suppressed that we don't know about. And there's a reason for that. And there's a root cause for that. And I'm real interested in understanding what that root cause is, why society has been designed and built this way that it has been. Because I think, I mean, for me, I think
mostly power, greed.
Right. I think there's obviously some type of agenda here. I won't pretend to know exactly what that is, but I know now that we are a lot more powerful than we've ever been led to believe. And we have been led to believe we are less powerful than we are for a reason, so that we can be controlled by a smaller group of people that have whatever agenda they have.
Yeah. I think it starts with self-awareness. It starts with like, realizing that you're on autopilot, and we all do it. Even a practiced meditator slips into autopilot, because if you've ever read The Power of Habit, it's just more efficient to run on habit than it is to be like cognizant and working mentally. And I would say that, like, for me, the skeleton key was how to reprogram. Like, okay, I've been programmed. You can't stop that. Like, you're a child and then you are programmed, and good luck now. Like the real crucial aspect for me was, oh, okay, I'm running on autopilot. Like, how do I become a little bit more in the present moment? But then even when I got to the present moment, I was like, okay, but 90% of the time or more, I'm still running on all these habit patterns. How do I change those? So that for me was like the big kind of like factor change, was like, okay, how do I work in analogies. So like for me, it's kind of like the ego. Thank you. So like for me, it's like the ego is a teammate, like not to be, thrown aside or killed or whatever. It's like a teammate that's keeping us alive. And so Parker is like the guy at the keyboard. It's like a computer, and like the interior of the mind, right? So it's like Parker's at the keyboard. The subconscious mind is like the hard drive. It's got all the information. It's connected to the internet. It's Siri. It's got every past life experience. It's got all of that coding from not only this life's conditioning, but all my past life's conditionings as well.
Right.
So all my stuff that I'm carrying over or whatever that I'm trying to like fix or like get past here. And then your soul, or like on a deeper level, like the base stuff would be like, I don't know, like the electricity that's running the whole thing. Okay.
Right.
And so you're just kind of clacking away, and you don't know anything. Like, you're just kind of like, what? And sure. And it's just like, if you give it an input, you're like bananas. And it's like, based on all this software that it has, it'll just be like, bananas are good or bananas are bad, depending on who you are. So the key here that I was talking about is like, how do I reprogram my computer to give it what I want when I tell it bananas, or when I tell it stress, or when I tell it 9 to 5, or when I tell it any of these things that we're talking about, because it has zeros and ones that have been written in from when we were kids. So to me, I was like immediately curious, like, how do I rewrite those zeros and ones? Because I'm currently not getting out of my computer what I want, right? Because when I am conscious, when I am aware, or when I'm meditating, or honestly, when I feel my conscience, in hindsight is 2020, right? Like, oh, yesterday I wish I had acted better. Or like 2 days ago, I wish I had been kinder to that person or done the right thing. It's always hindsight is 2020. So you really want to be like reprogramming it so that it's easier in the moment.
Right.
And for me, it was like, I was walking it from a week ago, I messed up, a day ago, I messed up, an hour ago, I messed up, a minute ago, I messed up. And then I was able to kind of see when I was thinking that I should mess up. And then I kind of walked it into that direction of like listening to my conscience more and more as like a barometer for what new coding should go in. Okay.
Right.
And then once I had that kind of like figured out, the problem still remains of like how to actually type the ones and zeros. Like, okay, I know what's right and wrong, but like, how do I actually do the coding? And for me, I found Vipassana. It's a meditation practice. It's basically just meditation in general. Gives you this ability to have what I call mental poise, or like you're able to kind of sit there while all of the crazy is coming up and thoughts and ideas and emotions are coming up based on whatever stimulus is coming in. And instead of getting on every train of thought and taking it a mile down the tracks, you're eventually, once you practice, able to just kind of watch the trains come and go. And you're just sitting there at the station, like watching all the crazy go by. And by doing that, you then are inherently writing ones and zeros, because if when your mind used to say, like Samantha said that thing that made you angry, you used to click the first button that was like get angry or whatever, right? Like you used to give it the electricity, whereas now you're just going clicking it, right? So it goes, oh, okay, like, it's kind of like AI. It knows like, oh, you didn't click, so that means now that goes down a priority, and we're going to like reorganize what we're giving you as the computer of your mind. So, if you're not clicking on stuff, you're reprioritizing what's coming up. And if what you are clicking on, once you become a little bit more poised, are those conscious, loving things that you want more and more of, you're actively saying, no, not the bad stuff. I want to do the good stuff. And you're clicking on those things and you're reorganizing. You're basically doing the reprogramming in that fashion. So with mental poise, you're able to have free will of choice as to what you're clicking on and energizing. Like they call the ego the purveyor of the will. It's essentially the same thing as this, like, you're basically giving willpower or clicks to whatever it is that's coming up. So if you're asleep at the wheel, you're purveying will, or you're clicking on stuff that's just habit. It's just the first thing. You're usually clicking on the first thing if you're asleep. So you need to, like, waking up is really waking up to the driver's seat of like, okay, I'm literally choosing what I'm prioritizing here. And then from that perspective, again, figuring out what's of value through your conscience and your heart, and then clicking on those things. And the better you get at that, then all of a sudden, like what I see in my future that I'm not quite at yet is like the realms of like sainthood, where like it becomes the first priority now, that it's the nicest thing to do or what have you. And then it becomes the new habit. So all of a sudden you can be back into a habit pattern, and all of the patterns are graceful, loving, etc. And you're a saint, essentially. Yeah. So that's the work that I see. Yeah.
Yeah. You really are so great at analogies. You are. And that was an awesome way to explain it, as always. And I
know it's a lot.
No, you're good. And two, I lose my train of thought. But
As
Like,
do we all.
yeah. Oh, yeah. So, and it really, and it's not an easy thing to reprogram your mind either. And I think that's something that can deter people is they'll try something for a few days or they'll be like, okay, I believe this now. And they think that they're fixed, but it's like to have an ingrained belief, an ingrained set of habits and perspectives and belief systems takes time. It takes time and repetition and commitment. And it's not something that can be fixed in a day. I mean, maybe if maybe monks and people that are very enlightened.
Have you ever read the Power of Habit?
I have not, but you make me want to.
I'll give you I'll synopsize really quick. Basically, habit works like this. There's an input or a stimulus, then there's the habit, and then there's the reward. It's just 3 parts. Okay, so it's like the example in the book is like you've got 5 minutes to kill at work. Okay, so that's the stimulus. Like, got to kill some time, right?
Yeah.
And the habit will just kick in. If you smoke cigarettes, it will be, oh, it's time for a cigarette. And then like 5 minutes later, you've accomplished killing 5 minutes, right? And you're also probably a little high. Now, if you're trying to reprogram that, the stimulus is going to be the same. You still have to kill 5 minutes all randomly, right? You want to switch out that middle part and still have some sort of a reward at the end. And you're right, it can be very difficult. And like you said, it can take months and years. If you go at it in a very like nitpicky kind of way of like, I want to change this one little habit, and you can get better at that and you will change over time. The thing though, in that book that is kind of like, again, another skeleton key is called a keystone habit. A keystone habit is like an all-encompassing filter for all of the stimulus. Okay. So like no matter what the thing is, you apply this filter to everything that you see. So in the example in the book, there's like a CEO and they are like, he's like a new hire and he's like, hey guys, like we're going to run everything through the filter of safety because it's like a very like dangerous business that they're in. And everyone's like, safety, I don't know. How's that going to make more money? Right. But they run everything through that filter. Like every process is this safe? If so, this, if not that, right? So like everything gets run through that. And eventually they have like less accidents. You know, the communication gets better in the business because now they're talking, hey boss, you got to change this, it's unsafe. And like all of the things start moving forward towards profitability for that business because of this overarching keystone habit. Now, a keystone habit that I have going right now is health and wellness. Like I'm sober, I, surf every day. I pass everything through the filter of, is this healthy or not, right? So like someone presents me with something and it's got like high volumes of sugar in it, it doesn't pass. And it doesn't matter how much I want. It doesn't matter that is actually triggering a habit of eat the sugar.
Right.
It failed the first test. So it didn't even get into the habit form. So that's what I would say to the audience is like, if you want to be healthier, make your keystone habit health. If you want to be, sharper or more focused, make it like a focus thing. So just look for like the initial filter that you can have. And like for me on the spiritual path as like a broader one is also, is this coming from love? Like is what I'm thinking loving to myself or to others? If not, don't click on it. If it's like something I want to say, is it coming from love? If not, don't click on it. If it is, cool, say it out loud, right? And then all of a sudden for me, that's been really like kind of turbojetting my growth because now I have a keystone habit that's helping in that way. So it can kind of make what seems very difficult actually get much easier very quickly.
Yeah, I absolutely am going to get that book because I'm somebody that needs to kind of compartmentalize like that. Like if it doesn't seem like so much needs to change and I can just focus on one thing at a time, then I feel like I'm a lot more apt to actually follow through with things. So that actually, thank you for that. That educated me just now. I really like that idea. And I think it's just important too, to like, when you are trying to change anything to compartmentalize like that, because nobody can change in a day. Rome wasn't built in a day. Like it just takes time to see real change to be real change. And I think that's an important thing to just try not to rush yourself so much, because that's something I absolutely try to do. I am an unfortunate perfectionist at almost everything. And that just hinders me a lot from just authentically creating things, because I'm like, is it perfect this way? Is it that way? And so I love that. Something too I wanted to ask you about. I wanted to go back to reincarnation for a second because
Sure.
I was wondering, have you ever heard of the thought or the notion that we are all different versions of each other at a different part in our spiritual journey? Like every human being is you at a different part of your spiritual journey and experience. Have you ever heard of that kind of concept?
Yeah, I've heard that idea.
What do you
Yeah.
think about that?
I mean, in the broadest sense, if we're all one, then it's true.
Yeah.
Right? Because at the end of the day, if we're all coming from the same source, then we're all fractions of God's mind having experiences as humans,
Right.
with amnesia. And so in that idea, sure, yeah, in a practical, like a little bit more pared down version, I think maybe there's like branches of it where it's like, sure, you might bump into yourself, but you might not be every person on the planet at that time, at that point in linear time. These are all like these types of ideas to me, I tend to try to like not really tie my mind into a pretzel too much on, because I'm not sure exactly how it really moves me forward or makes me a better person. Like,
Gotcha.
it would be cool to know that, but like, yeah, I don't like, I'm a very like practical person. I'm trying to take spiritual wisdom and apply it to the problems I have at hand. And
Right.
I don't have a problem with that at this time.
Okay, gotcha. I was just wondering what your stance on that was, because whenever I kind of heard of it, I just thought, I mean, I don't know for sure, obviously, but
It's a cool idea, you know.
yeah,
it's
an
I think it's called
interesting.
solipsism or something like that. It's interesting. I think it's called solipsism. It's basically like we're all one, and therefore, like, yeah, we're all the same mind. And
Right.
I think that's the kind of stuff that you would likely know and fully understand on the other side when you're
Right.
in what's called like abiding non-dual awareness. So like
Right.
here we have here we have like dualism, right? Like you and I are, in our perception, we're separate. And like post enlightenment, everything is like that oneness, and that's called like non-dual. So if you had like abiding, or like if it stuck around that you felt oneness all the time, you would have abiding non-dual awareness. And then in that state, you might be able to understand that concept, but we're still
Right.
not there. So
Right.
I don't, I'm not going to worry too much about trying to understand that my consciousness can't fathom.
Yeah, 100. And that's a point I kind of need to get to, because I'm just constantly running my brain ragged trying to understand things that I don't think I can quite understand in this body right now. Yeah.
It's not gonna help.
But it's just, I can't help it. I feel like I'm wired to want to understand the mysteries of life and to try and figure that out. And it's like, it's going to drive me insane because I can't figure it out for sure.
Yeah. They say, by knowledge, thy will approach God. So it makes sense that you're trying to have more knowledge, because then you understand the creation and the whole game that's afoot more closely. And therefore you're kind of rubbing elbows with God a little bit more and more as you become more wise. They also say, though, that on this path, which I'm also on with you, is that at the end of the path, at the summit of the trail, you have to give it all up, because you didn't really know anything. Like you couldn't possibly have fathomed everything, because there's so much more than what you could possibly figure out in this little window. It's kind of like how the human eye can only see a very narrow band of the spectrum of light.
Right.
You might be able to say, oh my God, I can see the whole rainbow. And then God's probably laughing, going like, dog, there's gamma rays and stuff. Like, you have no idea.
Yeah.
So like, yeah, that's kind of where I...
100%, because it is honestly genuinely unfathomable. As much as I try, and I always hit a wall. What came first, the woman or the egg? I can't even think about that, because it literally makes my brain hurt. So I always hit walls, but it's fun to indulge. It's fun to be like, I really live in this magical kind of existence that I can't understand right now, but something's cool's going on. So I'm here for that.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, I tend to, I kind of like, it's called chunking. You bite off like a little bit at a time. You're like, okay, what is the thing that I actually need to know more about? And again, this is where my practicality comes back in, because it's like, I have a problem. What do I not understand? How do I learn it? and just YouTube it, right? Or like just read a book about it or whatever it is to get the information. We live in the information age right now, and it's actually very easy to learn all this stuff. So it's like everybody should have their foot on the gas, because you can just Google anything you want and learn so much and apply it. And so, like, total side note, like I taught myself to be an automotive mechanic in the last couple of years off of YouTube. Like you can do anything right now. And
truly,
when it comes to spirituality and this kind of stuff, I think it can be overwhelming, like you said, to try to bite off the whole pie. And instead, I would just look at like, okay, perfectionism. Why don't I look at where that's coming from? Like where the fear is, like, let me feel into it. Let me bite off just that piece and start to apply some of my clicking and mental energy to it, purveying the will towards evolving past that little piece. And then once you have that piece figured out and you're not so worried about being perfect and you're putting out stuff that's imperfect because whatever, then you'll feel like, okay, I'm past that chapter in the book. Now what's next? Like I just put out a video called Obvious. Like what's the most obvious thing? Like what's the biggest thing that's holding you back? Bite that off, chew it, spit it out, and now what's the most obvious again? So don't look at the whole thing of all the problems. Just look at the most obvious one, the most pressing one, deal with that layer of the onion, peel it, and keep going.
Yeah, I love that. If you don't mind me asking, how old are you?
I'm 35.
Okay.
Look at age. I actually made a TikTok on this too. I'm kind of rattling through all my fun little topics. Yeah. I've always looked at age, not on physical terms.
Right.
Because I've always been able to see people's true age by their maturity levels, by their mental poise, like I was talking about, how they handle situations. Like, you know how you had friends growing up and some certain parents were very very cool or very like laid back, and other parents like were very spastic and like not handling the world as well. And you could see that even though they were adults, some of them had more figured out than others. Right. And some of them were, like you said, calmer and things of this nature, more mature essentially. And so I've always looked at people's age based on like those types of factors and not their physical body. And the joke that I made in the video, well, not so much of a joke, but like you may already be older than your parents. Your parents were probably older than their grandparents when they were your age. So, you might be older, like say there's somebody who's listening that's 25 and they're dealing with somebody either in any situation who's maybe twice their age, they're 50 years old, but the 50-year-old is acting immature in comparison to the 25-year-old. Right. It's because the 25-year-old, spiritually speaking, is more evolved, is older in this way. So, it's important not to necessarily give somebody who's older that like level of your like perception just based on their physical body. You should be basing it on their like thoughts, words, and actions that they're clicking on and like where they're at, and then dealing with them as such. Like obviously always come from a place of love, but like, we deal with children different than we deal with like mature adults. We just like, you kind of word things differently and you want to be like softer in certain ways. Right. You never want to like offend somebody. You kind of always want to bring them into the light. So, even if you're dealing with somebody, like I've met young children and teenagers who are older than me. Right. In this same way. So, I'm looking to them for, wow, how are they so present? How are they so spiritually evolved by how they're open-hearted more and stuff like I'm looking for things like that are elements of like high monkhood and sainthood that are present even in very young people. Certainly they could be old, like there could be a very old person. It might all line up at certain times for certain people. But that perception is very key. And so I think what you're hitting on there is, like I may come across as an old soul, even though I've kind of got like the young spunky thing. Yeah. But it's because I feel like I've been working very hard and I've been like aging very quickly, even though I've only gotten a couple years older.
Right. And two, I was really, what made me feel that way is like, you seem to have that authentic knowing about who you are enough to not really care what anybody else thinks about it. And I'm still in the stages where sometimes I care. I care how I'm perceived by other people. I care about, like, that's why I struggle with perfectionism, is I'm always trying to make it perfect in some kind of way that doesn't even exist, because I still struggle with the confidence of, yeah, I know some stuff and I can share that, and it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks about it. So that's just something I still struggle with a little bit. And that's something I feel like you kind of have down. And I'm in awe of that.
Well, I'll give you a couple nuggets on that topic.
Please do.
Yeah, I've got nuggets for days. So the thing that helped me like the most when I was in your shoes at that point was this idea that you barely even know yourself. You are struggling with like, who am I? Like, how do I, like what, like you said, self-confidence, etc. Right. And your whole life story of your ego. So like, where you're from, every experience you've been through, why you act certain ways. You have the most knowledge out of anybody on the entire planet as to like who you are and why. Now, that immediately means that anybody else, and you don't even know all of it, right? You're likely like way off, right?
Yeah.
Or at least somewhat off, right?
Right.
So that means that anybody else is going to be far, like way off.
Way off,
like,
right.
Way off.
That's a good way to think about it.
They're looking at you from like their whole filter and their whole thing about a very few moments in time that they've seen you at all. And they're guessing hard on like how much you know, your life experience, what you're probably like they're guessing from such a distant vantage point that they are inherently catastrophically wrong. And so who's going to take that person's perspective? They're wrong. Like, you can try to educate them more. Oh, I was brought up like this. Oh, you're missing this piece of me that you don't understand. You can try to bring them towards you, but they're never going to get there. And so with that awareness of like, I'm just learning about me. And so therefore everybody's like off, even your parents, even your siblings don't really know the depth of how you feel about everything, because words fall short, and like it's only very, very, very few siblings are like that close, right? So, a stranger on TikTok is just going to be miles away. So that to me immediately gave me a sense of, okay, well, they just don't know. So like it doesn't really matter. Their perception is so far off that it's like it takes the weight away, because it's like they don't have really any weight to throw at me because they're throwing it from so far away.
Right.
So that's kind of like the first piece that helped me. And then as far as like the just owning who you are part of it, I think it has a lot to do with giving less fucks.
Yeah.
And
I love that.
You really realize like at a certain point that like oftentimes you hear this line like, the only person thinking about you is you. Like nobody else is thinking about you. Like nobody else is worried about the thing you said a week ago. You're the only one that really cares about that. And if you just don't give a fuck about that, then then you're the last person. Nobody does. Right. So now all of a sudden, like other people's perceptions of you are going to shift as you like change what you're doing and who you are and what you're saying online or whatever it is.
Right.
And that'll just shift naturally. And then as you kind of step into your own confidence of caring less and less about what people think, because the two kind of go tandem, right? Like once you realize like, oh, that doesn't really matter what they think, then like I can just do whatever I want. And that kind of fuels the giving zero fucks part of it in tandem. And then eventually what will happen?
Giving zero fucks.
Oh, absolutely.
I love that.
Like about stuff like this. You know what I mean?
Yes,
like,
I know exactly what you mean.
give many fucks about like doing the right thing, but like give zero fucks about what people think about your outfits and, or whatever, or what your opinion is, you know, like,
Right.
so that's kind of like, yeah, that's the general idea surrounding that helped me.
I appreciate that. No, that sounds very helpful. And it's nice to just, even though sometimes you kind of already know, it's nice to hear it from somebody else. It's nice to hear somebody else's perspective, what helped them, because it's like, I know that ultimately what other people think about me doesn't matter, but I have to train my brain to understand that. And so, but I appreciate that.
One thing that'll help too is, oh, sorry, before we tangent, one thing that'll also help with that is like, you'll start to see that other people are just, they have an image of you in their mind, right? Like, again, they're wrong, but they have an image and they're trying to put pieces together of like who you are from their angle. And as you change by walking in your own confidence, they will shift their perception of you. So it's malleable what's out there. So like, even if your mom thinks that you're like this grade A student, but on the inside, you kind of want to like fail out and go left and go into like, I don't know, being a musician or something like that. That's just your mom, like that person's perception of who you are in her mind. And the minute that you decide, okay, I'm taking ownership over my life and I'm going to go do this because this is what I feel who I am.
Right.
You take a step in that direction. Everybody else now has to shift their picture of you, and it will just become malleable as you walk around. And you'll realize that as you move forward in your own like power, then everyone will just adjust to you. So don't adjust to try to fit people's incorrect perceptions and try to navigate how you think that they think of you.
Right.
Now you're wiggling around trying to match stuff that's not even you.
Right.
You got to just walk straight and they'll just be like, oh, all right. And just like realign. So once you start to see people's images realign, you'd be like, oh, okay, I just do me, and they'll figure it out.
Yeah. You're good. You're good at talking. You're good at analogies. No, I knew when I came across your video that we could have a good conversation, and just, even if we didn't agree on everything, just understand where each other was coming from, vibe,
Totally.
let it be what it is. So one of the last things I wanted to ask you, because we've been going for a minute here, I always kind of forget to even like pay attention to the time, but what is,
I got all the time in the world.
Me too, kind of. I make my own schedule too, like you do, but one of the last things I wanted to ask you is, what is, if you have one of the things that kind of, one of your spiritual practices or beliefs that kind of, that you follow through with the most, that is the most important to you, like your spiritual vice, if you will?
That's a good question. It's kind of shifted over time.
Yeah.
Because as we're walking on the path, we're like picking up tools and putting them down as we need them, and then eventually don't. I think for me, man, I think it's been said a million times, but like meditation via like self-awareness via meditation has really changed the game for me.
Yeah.
Because it allows me to take an observer role in life that I was otherwise so caught up in, and playing such like, I was holding everything very close to my heart and very like spun up in my own mind. As you can tell, my mind works very quickly. So like awareness, self-awareness of the interior of the mind, watching how it works, figuring out that whole clicking thing, that all comes from meditation. And like, I think a lot of people don't fully appreciate the jewel that is meditation.
Right.
And a lot of people have been trained poorly, and they're using like basically just like relaxation audio books that aren't really actually the work of strengthening the muscle that you need to like go toe to toe with the world.
Right.
Because the input that's coming at us I mean, on TikTok, Instagram, social media, like it's getting faster and crazier,
Yeah.
which makes this muscle of being able to have like an observer, like witnessing, not so caught up in all the crazy perspective, even more valuable. So I would say like that for me has been the one practice that has given me the most dividends in the spiritual practice and in life. Sure, life is completely a spiritual practice no matter what, but like even just caught off guard, like if for instance, like, you know, like relationships are like in many people's opinions, like why we incarnate is to like have relations, to be reflected and triggered and poked and prod so that we can see all of our stuff. It's like why they say that the enemy is your greatest spiritual teacher, because they're the one poking you and prodding you and showing you, oh, when you did that, I reacted all triggered. Let me work on that. Thank you for showing me. That's why it's the teacher. So, you know, I had an experience where my girlfriend at the time, we both went to a 10-day meditation retreat. And I've been to a handful of them now. I've done like maybe 4 or 5.
It sounds amazing.
And it's very difficult. It's like, it's not for the faint of heart. It's very hard. But it's like, it's an investment that you get paid out so heavy on. It's like a 1,000x, like it's better than any stock. And basically we went in, we meditated for 10 days and we both had the training, and it evolved our relationship so much because now we were able to handle those difficult conversations that come up in relationships with a lot more poise and calm that otherwise we would be emotionally spun by. So like a classic example is like, personally, when I was a kid, I would get emotional, as we all do, and I would run away. That was like my way of dealing with it. I would simply run away from the fight or whatever it was with like my mom or whatever. And so that like training, that conditioning from my childhood was carrying over into, you know, my life. And so I would have like an argument with like this girlfriend. And I remember like in the beginning of our relationship, I'd be like, I'm getting very emotional. I still had some communication skills. So I would say like, I'm getting very emotional. I'm getting kind of hot headed. Let me just take 5. So I had reduced running away to like taking 5, cooling off and coming back. So I'd reduced it to a degree, but I was still running away. And post this meditation, it allowed me to, we were in a car, I'll never forget, we're like in this car and it's like this conversation is getting emotional, and I just started communicating that I could feel my emotions rising and that we just needed to like breathe for a few moments, but that I wasn't going to leave the car. I wasn't going to run away. We weren't going to end the conversation. And it really helped. Like it moved us in that relationship, and it moved me personally forward towards being able to, again, take an observer role in sensing, okay, I sense all of this stuff. I see all of these wheels turning. I don't want to get spun out and just start clicking on stuff. I don't want to just start saying stuff that I don't mean. I don't want to cause any irreparable damage. So let's just like take a breath, because when you're meditating, you're just like witnessing this stuff and you're coming back to the breath and you're just like trying to regain a sense of balance and passive awareness and equanimity, which means like you're equal to it. You're not like running away or towards anything. So trying to regain equanimity. And we were able to calm the situation down and continue the conversation quite calmly and move forward as adults. And that is just one example of, since then, there have been hundreds in my life where even something as minor as, oh, somebody in the grocery line is using change to pay for their money instead of a credit card. Everybody who's listening knows that you'd be like, oh, this mother, you know, like it would just start to be the ideas of like, what the F, right? Witnessing that stuff coming up and letting that list of ideas populate and not clicking on any of them until it gets to something loving and compassionate, because that's your keystone habit now, and clicking on the one that's coming from love and grace, and then having that be the way that you present yourself, which is why you're perceiving me as somebody who's more mature, because I'm having that poise from meditation and I'm clicking on the right one and presenting that. And that's how I've been operating since being trained in meditation. So
Right.
that's a very long-winded answer of saying it's meditation. And that gives you that kind of steadfastness and poise while all the crazy goes on, and you get to kind of, again, reprogram. And it really has been the one thing that I always tell people, that even if they can just get a little bit of training and start moving in that direction, it will help even in the very beginning. Even if you're terrible at it,
Right.
it's something that is a requirement. Yeah.
Right. My answer is actually the same. I always tell people meditation changed my life. It was like the first spiritual practice I even tried. And I started with 1-minute meditations because I'm the type of person, like, my mind goes a million miles per hour. So does my mouth. And so I was like, let me just start here and kind of build. And so I kind of feel like this is a synchronistic moment too, because I started out on YouTube meditations, like the relaxing music and the things that you were talking about.
Totally.
And I feel like it hasn't really been working for me anymore. So what kind of meditation, what do you use? What kind of avenues do you use? What kind of meditation do you do?
So those 10-day retreats were Vipassana, Vipassana.
Am I right? Oh, okay. I've actually heard of that before.
So Vipassana is basically using single pointed focus, like, when you're focusing on like a candle or you're focusing on like one thing. In this case, we're watching like the breath and like the physical sensation of the breath. And then it's giving your mind something to chew on. And it's a very subtle thing. It's not the like loudest thing. It's not like a TikTok that's like so loud where it's just like so entertaining. The feeling of breath going in and out of your nose is quite boring. And so by comparison, the craziness in our heads is much louder. And it's strengthened like the whole time. Basically, you're sitting there. It doesn't matter how you sit. You can sit in a chair. It doesn't matter. You're sitting there and you're going, okay, my nose itches a little bit and now it's colder. And now, oh, right, did I leave the oven on or whatever? And you get on that train of thought, and the game afoot is to come back from, like, realize as quickly as you can that you're now thinking about the oven, and come back to, oh, right, I'm supposed to be thinking about the sensations around my nostrils. So the quicker you can walk that back, like you might daydream for 10 minutes in the beginning, you might daydream for then 5 minutes. As you get stronger and stronger, you'll daydream less and less, and you'll be able to stay on the very subtle sensation of witnessing your breath for longer and longer. So you might stay there for a moment before you daydream, and then the moments start to get longer. And eventually, after lots of practice, that muscle gets stronger. So you start to realize quicker and you start to stay longer. And that just takes practice. That's just like weight training. It's just a lot of reps. And so you sit there, you do that. And in the 10 days, you do that for 4 days of like 8 to 10 hour days. And then you do 6 days of the next stage of it. But like for most of your audience, they need to do that beginning part before they can even mess with the other stuff. So, it's called Anapana is like that first 4 days. The grander picture is Vipassana. It's anything to do with single pointed focus like that, like Zen has a lot of that stuff. So it's not just limited to this one particular practice, but any single pointed focus is going to train the mind to start to come back from those daydreams and come back from just like, again, the purveyor of the will is just doling out willpower like crazy. And you're just starting to rein that in a little bit. And then eventually that will create that more passive observer effect. And then you'll be able to start to click lower on the list because you can start to see the options. So it's called Vipassana. And yeah, that's the basis of it.
Okay, awesome. And do you, like, when you meditate at home, like, do you have a daily meditation ritual or no?
Yeah, I'm kind of off my game right now, but
me too. Me too.
I think the one thing that I try to do is I sit every day, if I can. And it's a discipline that I'm like, good at some days and bad at other days. But regardless, I still see dividends. That's the crazy part. It's like, even if I'm not sitting every day for a week or two, I still catch myself and I can see the list populating and I can
Right.
choose better because there's like a latent base strength that you can build up over time.
Right.
It can get like faltered. Like I could imagine if I didn't do it for a year or two, that it would probably get weaker.
Right.
But once you start to gain that kind of awareness, it's, again, it pays dividends.
Yeah.
So yeah, I try to sit every day. They say when you get trained, they say that the modern world is like, this is their analogy, not mine. It's like after 10 days, you've now like dug a bunch of dirt out of your mind. You've just like gotten a bunch of like this crap out and it's a little bit more empty. But the craziness of the world is constantly putting it back in. It's like constantly shoving. There's like the world is just going like share, whatever, like TikTok this, Instagram that, money, greed, sex, like violence, all the stuff.
Right.
And it's filling back in. And they say that 2 hours a day is par. So like the world will put 2 hours of work in, and you have to do 2 hours to get back to where you were the day before. So I think that's like, sure, that might be a little bit extreme, but like, I think 2 hours for me is like, I'm getting ahead. But it's that kind of level. Like if you put in 5-10 minutes here and there, you will see some dividends and some results just from the perspective shift, right. But you won't have as strong of the muscle of pulling back as quickly. So
right.
You'll probably still be like, remember earlier when I was talking about like hindsight is 2020, like, oh, a day ago, I did something wrong I shouldn't have, right. Half a day, an hour, etc. Like bringing that to the present moment of having like the ability to like act on the fly more in grace, that comes from having that meditation down pat so that you gain that poise, where you're not really going to get that from those like more guided stuff. Like if somebody's talking in your ear the whole time and there's music and all that,
right.
that's very loud. That's like training wheels. It's not really going to like get you very strong. That would be like lifting the bar with no weights on it.
Right.
Like sure, you might get a little bit of something out of it, but you start to put weights on when you take away the training wheels and you start really doing the heavy lifting of, oh, right, I was distracted. Oh, right, for
right.
hours and hours. Yeah.
Training wheels is a great way to describe it because I find that guided meditations, they kind of can help me get into the space I need to be in or ask myself certain questions, whatever. But as I'm listening on, I always realize that I'm kind of tuning it out. Like I'm kind of going somewhere else and not like maybe subconsciously I'm receiving what they're saying, but consciously I'm not really there anymore. I've gone somewhere deeper. And that too is one of the reasons that going deeper is why meditation changed my life. Like you can get into a sweet spot in meditation where you are there's not time. Like you don't realize how long you've been in there. Cause sometimes I'll come out of meditation, I'm like, that was an hour and 30 minutes. And that's like the longest one I've ever done. But I was just like, I didn't even realize, like I was lost somewhere, like that I can't even necessarily explain, but it was just peaceful. And like it's kind of like you're asleep, but you're not asleep. Like you were awake, but just in a different state of being and consciousness. And the peaceful and like the relaxation that can provide you is just definitely a really untapped, not enough tapped resource that we've got going on in our own brains for sure. So meditation changed my life for sure too. So Parker, is there anything that you want to ask me or talk about? Bring up?
We've hit on so many good things.
I know. We've had a really good conversation. I'm excited about it. I just wanted to at least extend the invitation in case.
Yeah, sure. I hadn't really thought of anything, but now, I would say I'm always curious as to like, like where people are at. Like we talked about, like, you're dealing with some of the issues that you're working on right now.
Yeah.
I'm also always curious about like what you figured out last, because like we're all having these experiences and everyone's getting different aha moments. And like, I've got some of these nuggets that I've been doling out. What was like the last kind of thing that you feel like you figured out?
Oh, that's a good one. My last thing that I figured out, I'm sorry, give me a second.
Or at least like came into the awareness of like, that's the thing that I need to work on now. Like you don't have to have solved it, but like, oh, like I see now.
Oh, definitely. I mean, within myself personally,
Yeah.
definitely that I am a people pleaser. I have always been a people pleaser, and that is kind of like what I have used to go through life. And I've always kind of just been like assessing other people and trying to understand how they want me to act, and then acting in that way to fit in, to assimilate, whatever. And I kind of just realized why I do that. I realized from my own past, my childhood, all that stuff, the kind of root causes of why I've become that way. And
Mm.
just understanding that that's something that I can change within myself. Like I made myself a self hypnosis that I just like recorded on my software and then I listened to at night. I like had it repeat itself. It's like 11 minutes long, but I had it repeat over and over again. So it's like 3 hours at night. But in the morning, I'll just
Nice.
listen to it for the 11 minutes. And yeah, so I just, in my own words, in my own voice, knowing from my own personal experiences, I was like, let me retrain my brain myself, like how we all have to do it anyway. But I liked the idea of me knowing where I've been and using the exact terminology I need to kind of retweak
Mm.
how I think about myself and about life and stuff like that.
Oh.
So that's probably what I would say.
Oh, nice. Oh,
Yeah.
I like that. I like the like custom
Right?
hypnosis. Yeah, that's nice.
Totally.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. And
Right
and
on.
I added music to it and like frequency and stuff too. So for
Yeah,
my root
yeah.
chakra, because that's the one I want to work on the most right now, is like my
Nice.
belonging, my grounding, stuff like that. So yeah, I'd been meaning to do it for years and I finally just
That's
did it.
beautiful. I'm gonna make a voice memo and just
Do
listen to it
that,
now. That's
do
cool. Yeah,
it.
that's smart. That's really
Absolutely.
smart. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, no, so happy that we did this and that you said yes
Me
to
too. Totally.
podcasting with me. Do you want to tell people where they can find you and what kind of content you make and stuff like that?
Sure. Yeah. So like I said, I'm an artist and I've been making paintings for a long time. So most of my handles are surrounding the art side of things, and I've just been doling out the spiritual stuff on top of it. So
Right.
on Instagram, I'm at Parker's Paintings, Parkers Paintings. And it's the same on TikTok, except there's an underscore in between the two words.
Gotcha. Yes, I'll have
Thank you
you
so much
linked.
for having me on. That was so
Yes.
fun. I'm glad that we were able to connect and do this. And
Me too.
I hope that your audience got some helpful tips out of it.
Definitely. Me too. All right, guys, that's all for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening, learning, and growing with me. I hope you continue to do so. My social medias, as well as Parker's, will be linked down below. So definitely go check those out. And as always, keep an open mind, do your own research, and think for yourself. Sending love.